welcome back to another video. So today we're looking at when and how do people's attitudes change as a result of cognitive dissonance. So firstly, what is cognitive dissonance? Cognitive dissonance is an unwelcome emotional conflict experienced by an individual when their actions and inner beliefs are not consistent with one another. These conflicts are most commonly caused by social pressure to conform to a behaviour that an individual does not agree with, or an undesirable action or habit that the individual believes they should not act upon and yet still does. People's attitudes change to reduce cognitive dissonance, providing confidence and justification in behaviours. This is disputed by other theories such as the self-perception theory, which we'll come to look at later. The initial theory of planned behaviour was formed by Schifter and Ajzen in 1985. They identified predicting variables that influence whether an individual will engage in an undesirable action, for example taking drugs, or a desirable behaviour such as eating healthily. The intention of an individual to follow through with the behaviour is based upon three main factors. Firstly, attitudes, secondly, subjective norms, and thirdly, perceived control. The attitudes an individual has reflect thoughts on the possible consequences for action or inaction. Subjective norms mirror the socially acceptable norms within society and thus encompasses cultural influences upon the individual, whilst perceived control is the conviction that an individual has in themselves to persist and follow through with the action. This self-efficacy contains memories about past experiences and previous failures and triumphs. The higher the memory of triumphs, the more persistent and dedicated an individual is to a similar challenge. This theory explains why individuals who are experiencing cognitive dissonance over a negative action, such as smoking, continue to smoke because the individual's perceived control may be very low, possibly due to a low self-esteem or rumination of past failures to quit smoking. In order to reduce cognitive dissonance, individuals may change their attitudes by justifying their actions or trivializing the need for attitudes and behaviors to match. Attitudes often change after a choice has been made. This is supported by Rosenfeld, Kennedy, and Giacalone, who apply Festinger's 1958 theory of cognitive dissonance to their own experiment, which was conducted in 1986. Festinger's 1957 theory maintains that individuals enhance their opinions of decisions after they have made them. This would reduce any cognitive dissonance experienced over not choosing the correct option, whilst also justifying and promoting the chosen option to reassure the individual their choice was valid. Rosenfeld et al. In 1986 asked 62 participants to evaluate their probability of winning a competition, which involved guessing the number of gumballs in a cube. Participants had either already guessed, were about to guess, or were not playing. It was found that the post-decision group expressed significantly more confidence in their decision than the pre-decision group. This supports the post-decisional dissonance theory. However, a criticism of the study is that it was conducted within a shopping centre and thus uses opportunity sampling for whoever happened to be in the shopping centre that particular day. This is unrepresentative of the population and therefore ungeneralizable to other settings. Returning to the experiment by Festinger and carlsmith in 1959, participants were required to take part in a boring and monotonous task. After the task was finished, the experimenter asked the participant if they would report to the next participant that the experiment was enjoyable and interesting. For this lie, the participants were offered either $20 and $1. Participants in the $20 group were not perceived as significantly more persuasive than those in the $1 group, but had a less positive view of the experiment. The higher rating of positivity from those in the $1 group can be explained due to cognitive dissonance. Participants receiving $1 could not see the money as an incentive for lying. Thus, the participants believed that the experiment itself must have been enjoyable, and their attitudes toward the experiment become more positive than the $20 group. Participants in the $20 group can attribute their lying to the money incentive, therefore reducing cognitive dissonance. Using an independent group's design can lead to consequences, such as individual differences between participants, which can impact the results. More recent research also observed that behaviour can dictate attitudes in order to avoid psychological discomfort and the associated negative effect created by inconsistencies between two cognitions. This was found by Martini and Millard and Olive in 2013. From an evolutionary perspective, it is advantageous for an individual to reduce the conflict between choices, thus reducing stress. However, it is also arguable that other factors are influencing an individual's attitudes. The exposure effect refers to a partiality for familiarity, thus influencing an individual's behaviour to repeatedly follow the same trend and make the same choices. The mere exposure effect was explored by Zajonc in 1968, who placed Chinese characters around a university. Months later, an experiment was conducted where the university participants were shown Chinese characters and asked to rate which characters they preferred. Participants rated the characters that they had had regular contact with as more preferable over some of the unfamiliar Chinese characters. However, this preference was not seen in a previous study where the Chinese characters were replaced with common English words, which was done by Amster and Glasman in 1966. Thus, Zajonc in 1968 concluded that attitudinal enhancement produced by means of exposure will be more readily affected for novel objects than for familiar ones. Behaviour influences the attitudes and beliefs of an individual because the individual infers that their behaviour should reflect how they wish to act. Similarly, it is difficult to form an attitude without relating to past experiences and behaviours. Cognitive dissonance proclaims that distress is caused when valued attitudes are not consistent with behaviour, thus leading to a change in attitudes. Whilst self-perception theory focuses on attitudes that are not necessarily valued or important to the individual, and yet are still changed due to inconsistencies with behaviour. Behm in 1965 argues that an individual's belief and attitude statements may be predicted and controlled by manipulating his overt behaviour and the stimulus conditions under which it occurs in ways that would lead an outside observer to infer that the individual held the belief or attitude we wish to obtain. This suggests that an individual forms attitudes based on the view and judgments an observer would have of their actions. An individual uses behaviour to infer their attitudes because their own knowledge of their inner thoughts can be untrustworthy and inaccurate. If an individual behaves conflictingly to their perceived attitudes, that individual will subconsciously remove the importance of the attitude, convincing themselves that they would not have engaged in important behaviour disagreeing with their attitudes. A prime example of this is the previously described experiment by Festinger and carlsmith in 1959, where participants believe that receiving $1 does not justify lying, thus saying the experiment was enjoyable must have been truthful. This theory of self-perception differentiates itself from cognitive dissonance because a change in attitude is not motivated by an aversive state. Due to cognitive dissonance, an individual's attitudes are changed, primarily by self-affirmation. However, there are other techniques, such as finding support for behaviour and positive affect. By encountering other people who have engaged in similar behaviours, there is social support for that action, and their justification and reasoning can be reapplied to the individual's own beliefs. Similarly, by learning to associate a potential negative behaviour with positive emotions and experiences, an individual can change their beliefs via positive effect. For example, when an individual initially starts to gamble, they may view the behaviour as negative and experience cognitive dissonance when engaging in the behaviour. However, due to operant conditioning, if the individual starts to see the consequences of the behaviour as rewarding, they will engage in the behaviour more recurrently. Addiction may occur because of the physiological rewards, such as winning and happiness, the psychological rewards, such as the suspense before revealing the winner, social rewards, such as appraisal from other gambling peers, and financial rewards, such as any winnings the gambler makes. Self-affirmation is a response to restore global self-worth, where an individual enhances their positive qualities and proceeds with positive actions after a conflicting behaviour caused cognitive dissonance. Hoshino in 2012 argues that if a person's motivational goal is to maintain a positive self-image and the sense of moral integrity, the dissonance does not need to be fixed, only the positive self-image of the individual. To conclude, the unpleasant experience of cognitive dissonance forms an explanation for why an individual may change their attitudes and beliefs. When reflecting on past choices, the individual lessens the other options by remembering flaws and enhances their choice by reinforcing the positives, thus removing discomfort. There are arguably other theories for why attitudes change, such as the mere exposure effect, where familiarity influences the decisions made, or when an individual reduces the necessity for their attitudes and behaviours to match and embraces cognitive dissonance. However, in order to reduce cognitive dissonance, the individual must either change their attitudes, justify their behaviour, or appraise the choice that was made. Thank you for listening. I hope you found this useful, and see you again soon. Bye.